Night wrapped itself around the Sea of Galilee like a dark, restless blanket. The disciples rowed hard against the raging wind, their arms trembling, faces slick with rain and fear. Waves towered and broke against their small wooden boat, tossing it like driftwood upon a roaring sea. Lightning tore across the clouds, flashing white upon eyes wide with terror. They had seen Jesus calm storms before, but tonight he was not with them. He had gone up the mountain to pray. Now, as the night deepened and their strength waned, something began to stir beyond the mist. At first, they thought it was the storm playing tricks. A shape, a figure, moving upon the water itself. The wind fell still for a heartbeat, and their hearts seemed to stop. A voice whispered through the storm's fury, steady and sure, "Take courage. It is I. Do not be afraid." And through the waves came Jesus, walking on the very waters that sought to swallow them whole. The disciples huddled together, every flash of lightning carving their fear into sharp relief. The sea seemed alive, dark, angry, endless. Then came that voice again, warm and steady, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "It is I," said Jesus. "Do not be afraid." The words reached deep into their trembling hearts, slicing through the roar of wind and waves. Yet disbelief still clung to them like the rain on their skin. Could it truly be him? The same hands that broke the loaves now brushed against the very sea. Peter squinted through the downpour, his heart pounding with something deeper than fear, a desperate hope. Around him the others clung to the boat, whispering prayers, their eyes fixed on the glowing figure drawing near. The storm still raged, but within their hearts, a spark of faith began to flicker against the wind. The wind howled as Peter called out above the storm, "Lord, if it is truly you, command me to come to you on the water." His voice wavered between faith and fear, but Jesus' reply came soft and sure. "Come." Silence seemed to fall between the thunder's rumbles, the invitation hanging in the air. The other disciples gasped as Peter gripped the boat's edge, one foot hovering over the churning black water. For a heartbeat he hesitated, the storm reflecting in his eyes. Then with a trembling breath he stepped forward, and his foot did not sink. The sea, wild and raging, held him up. The others cried out in awe, their fear giving way to astonishment. Peter took another step, eyes fixed on Jesus, his heart thundering louder than the storm. The wind whipped Peter's cloak as he took another trembling step, then another. Every motion felt impossible yet real. The water rippled beneath his feet, holding him like a living promise. Jesus' eyes shone with gentle strength, drawing him onward. But as the waves rose higher and the thunder cracked again, Peter's gaze flickered. Fear crept in like cold water through cracks in a hull. He looked down. The moment his eyes left Jesus, the water beneath him gave way. His heart dropped as his body plunged into the icy deep. "Lord, save me!" he cried, arms flailing as the storm swallowed him. Instantly, a hand, strong, sure, and warm, reached through the rain and caught him. The storm seemed to pause as Jesus lifted Peter up, water streaming from his robe. Jesus' hand pulled Peter up through the raging waters, his eyes full of compassion. "You of little faith," he said softly, "why did you doubt?" Peter gasped for air, clutching Jesus' arm, his heart pounding with awe and shame mingled together. The storm screamed around them as they walked together. Yes, walked back to the waiting boat. The disciples fell silent, eyes wide and hands trembling as the two stepped aboard. The moment Jesus' foot touched the deck, the wind ceased, waves settled into calm ripples, and moonlight spilled across a glass-smooth sea. Silence fell heavy and whole. One by one, the disciples knelt before him, whispering, "Truly, you are the Son of God." And in that stillness, the lesson beneath the waves was revealed. Not the miracle of walking on water, but the truth that faith stands firm when eyes remain on Him. Our should soar, shy. The night hung heavy with silence after the storm's sudden peace. Yet Peter's heart was anything but still. His breath came in ragged gasps as he clutched the side of the boat, dripping and trembling. The miracle had happened. He had stood upon the water, but his doubt had pulled him under. Jesus' words lingered in his mind like gentle thunder. Why did you doubt? Around them, the disciples whispered in awe, some reaching out to touch the place where the waves had stilled. Peter looked at Jesus, still catching his breath, and a quiet realization dawned. Faith was not about walking upon water. It was about trusting the one who ruled it. The sea shimmered softly beneath the moon, calm as glass, and for the first time that night, Peter's trembling gave way to peace. The air smelled fresh, washed clean by the storm. The disciples, still awed by what they had seen, gathered close to Jesus, whispering their amazement. No words could capture what their eyes had witnessed. Their teacher walking upon the waves, the sea obeying his steps, the winds bending to his will. Peter, silent and humbled, watched the reflection of the moon ripple over the water. His heart swelled, not with pride, but with gratitude. He understood now that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to trust through it. Jesus looked around at his friends, his voice low and kind as he spoke of faith that anchors the soul, even when the waters rise. As the boat drifted across the quiet waters, a gentle breeze stirred their robes. The disciples' hearts were lighter now, filled with wonder. Peter gazed at Jesus, remembering the strength in his grip, the peace in his eyes even as the waves rose. He whispered a prayer of thanks, his voice trembling with humility. Jesus looked at him and smiled knowingly, as if seeing both the failure and the faith within his heart. The sea seemed to hum softly beneath them, like creation itself listening in reverence. Each disciple began to feel it. The truth that had always been there. Faith wasn't born from calm seas, but from trusting the Master in the midst of storms. Dawn began to rise on the horizon, painting the waves in gold and rose. The disciples watched in silence as light touched the edges of the mountains, turning the once terrifying sea into a vision of peace. Jesus stood at the bow, his robe catching the first sunlight. Peter followed his gaze toward the distant shore. The same waters that had nearly swallowed him now shimmered like glass beneath the sunrise. He realized then that every storm, every fear, every moment of sinking had brought him closer to the truth. When faith falters, Jesus reaches out. He never lets go. The memory of that hand pulling him from the deep burned in his heart like dawn's first fire. As the boat neared the shore, the disciples felt the gentle rhythm of the waves guiding them home. The land ahead shimmered under the morning sun, and the air carried the scent of new beginnings. Jesus turned to them with a smile that spoke of endless compassion. "Have faith," he said softly. "And remember, I am with you always." Peter met his gaze, his heart steady now, no longer afraid of the storms to come. He looked once more at the sea that had tested his faith and whispered, "Thank you." And so the lesson beneath the waves was complete. That faith, though small as a mustard seed, could carry one through the fiercest storms, as long as it was fixed upon the one who walks upon the water. Morhinni, Iwashrus, Yursafro. Niskarishiwa. As the disciples stepped ashore, the wet sand clinging to their feet, the silence of morning felt sacred. The storm, the fear, the miracle, all of it echoed in their minds like a song too wondrous to forget. Jesus walked ahead of them, his robe drying in the gentle sunrise breeze. The world felt reborn, Every ripple of the sea shimmered with hidden meaning. Every gust of wind whispered of faith. Peter lingered at the water's edge, gazing out at the waves that had once terrified him. He now saw not danger, but depth. An endless sea held together by the same power that had lifted him from it. Jesus turned and looked back, meeting his eyes with a smile that said more than words could ever tell. The disciples gathered around a small fire Jesus built with simple ease. The warmth of the flames licked away the chill of the night, and the smell of roasting fish mingled with the fresh scent of the sea. As they ate quietly, Jesus spoke to them about faith that stands firm even when storms rise. His words painted pictures in their hearts, seeds growing into mighty trees, anchors holding fast through tempest winds. Peter listened closely, his hands clasped, eyes lowered in humility. For the first time, he understood that true strength wasn't found in his own courage, but in trust that did not waver, even when fear came like a flood. After the meal, Jesus led them along the shoreline, the soft sand shifting beneath their feet. The waves whispered beside them, steady and sure. Peter walked nearest to him, his mind still replaying the night's miracle. Jesus glanced at him with eyes full of love and said, "Peter, when storms come again, and they will, remember that I am greater than the waves." The words fell deep into Peter's heart, like stones dropped into still water, rippling with eternal truth. Behind them, the others followed, their hearts lightened, the lesson of the sea etched into their souls. Faith, they realized, was not a shield from the storm, but the courage to walk through it with eyes fixed on Jesus. As the day brightened, the disciples found a quiet place to rest beneath a cluster of palms. Peter lay back, eyes tracing the clouds drifting above, his heart no longer heavy. Each cloud seemed to tell a story of grace, that even when fear pulled him under, love reached down. He turned toward the sea once more, remembering that moment of sinking and rescue, of failure met with forgiveness. The others spoke softly nearby, marveling that they had seen the Lord walk where no man should walk, and that he had invited one of them to follow. It was a miracle, yes, but more than that, it was a message written upon the waters for every soul that would ever fear to trust. Later that afternoon, the sea was calm, shining like polished glass beneath the sun. Jesus stood once more at the water's edge, gazing out across its shimmering expanse. The disciples gathered behind him, and a deep peace settled over them all. Peter stepped forward, his voice gentle. "Master, I will never forget what you taught me." Jesus turned and placed a hand on his shoulder, saying, "Then let your faith never look away from me." The waves lapped softly against the sand, echoing his words. In that moment, Peter knew that every storm ahead would carry this truth. No matter how fierce the wind, no matter how deep the water, the Savior's hand would always be there. Stronger than the storm, steady as the sea. As the sun drifted higher, the disciples followed Jesus inland along a winding path lined with wildflowers and olive trees. The air was warm and full of birdsong, but within their hearts, a deeper stillness remained, the echo of the sea's miracle. Jesus walked ahead, his pace unhurried, every step filled with quiet strength. Peter walked behind him, replaying that single powerful moment, the instant he sank, the hand that saved him. He realized now that faith wasn't loud or boastful. It was like a whisper, steady and sure, that called through fear's roaring wind. The others followed, glancing at Jesus with wonder. The same one who had calmed the storm was now speaking to their souls. Without a single word, they stopped near a hill overlooking the sea, now distant and peaceful. The waves shimmered below like liquid glass, the memory of the storm now only a story in the wind. Jesus sat upon a large stone and spoke gently. "Faith begins small, like a seed. But when it grows, It moves mountains and calms seas. The disciples listened, their hearts stirred anew. Peter's eyes welled as he realized how easily he had doubted. But Jesus' gaze held no condemnation, only compassion. "When you fall," he continued, "I will lift you. When you fear, remember my hand." His words sank deep into them, wrapping their souls in a quiet courage that would outlast every storm. As Jesus' words faded into the wind, silence settled, holy and deep. The disciples sat motionless, hearts burning with quiet truth. Peter felt the weight of the lesson press gently upon his spirit. He remembered how quickly fear had stolen his focus, how the waves had risen only when his eyes turned away. "Keep your gaze upon me," Jesus had said. Those words echoed now with new meaning. It wasn't only about walking upon water. It was about walking through every trial of life with trust that didn't waver. The wind brushed through the grass like a whispering reminder, carrying faith's promise to every listening heart. Later, as the day cooled, the group began their walk back toward the nearby village. Along the way, children ran out from between the olive trees, laughing and waving, their joy spilling into the air like music. Jesus paused, smiling as he knelt to bless them, his eyes bright with love. The disciples watched, hearts moved by the tenderness of his touch. They saw the same power that commanded the waves, now resting in a gentle smile upon a child's head. Peter's thoughts swelled with awe. This was the whisper of faith. Not thunder or lightning, but kindness, mercy, and peace that spoke louder than storms. As evening fell, the disciples reached a quiet clearing. The air was still, filled with the scent of earth and wild thyme. Jesus stood at the edge of a stream, the last light of day glinting in his eyes. Turning toward his friends, he said softly, "Faith is not about walking above the waves. It's about walking with me, even when you cannot see where your feet may fall." The words hung in the air, simple yet eternal. Peter closed his eyes, the truth sinking deep into his heart. He knew storms would come again, but now he also knew the one who would always meet him there. Hand outstretched, steady as light. Days passed, and the miracle upon the sea became a story, whispered across villages and shores. Fishermen spoke of the teacher who tamed the storm, of the man who walked for a heartbeat upon the waves. Yet, for the disciples, it was more than a tale. It was a truth written upon their souls. Each time they saw the sea, they remembered the fear that once ruled their hearts and the peace that followed when Jesus spoke. Peter, especially, carried it deep within him. Sometimes, when the wind rose suddenly over the Galilean hills, he would pause and smile, hearing again that calm voice through the storm. "Take courage, it is I." One evening, as the disciples prepared their nets, a soft breeze swept across the water. Peter paused, his hand resting on the rough wood of the boat, eyes distant. "I once feared these waves," he said quietly. John looked up, smiling. "But now they remind you of him," he replied. Peter nodded. The memory of sinking no longer brought shame, it brought gratitude. The storm had not defeated him. It had revealed how much he needed the one who could still the sea. The others nodded in quiet agreement, their hearts united in remembrance of that night when faith learned to walk upon the water. Later that night, as the stars appeared, the disciples gathered around a small fire on the beach. The flames flickered softly, and their voices mingled with the lapping of waves. Jesus sat among them, silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the constellations above. Then he spoke. "The world will bring storms, but my peace will never be taken from you." His words filled the night with quiet power. The disciples leaned closer, their hearts anchored by his voice. Peter felt a stirring deep within, a promise stronger than fear, brighter than lightning. more lasting than the sea itself. The fire crackled softly as Jesus continued, his voice weaving truth into the night. "Faith," he said, "is not proven when the sea is calm, but when the wind howls and you still believe. I am near." The disciples exchanged glances, their eyes glistening. Peter bowed his head, the memory of his faltering steps now a testimony of grace. Around them, the darkness was deep, yet it did not feel empty. It felt full of promise, of peace, of presence. The waves whispered faintly against the shore, as if echoing every word spoken. In that moment, the lesson was sealed within them. Storms reveal who commands the wind. As the night deepened and the fire faded to embers, Jesus rose and looked once more toward the sea. "Remember," he said gently, "faith does not end when the storm is gone. It begins when you choose to trust." He turned toward them, his expression radiant in the starlight. The disciples stood in silence, hearts stirred with unshakable devotion. Peter watched him, remembering the strength of that saving hand, the calm that followed his cry for help. He knew now that faith was not about perfection, but persistence. And as the moonlight danced upon the water, the whisper of the waves seemed to carry the same truth forever across time. Believe, and do not fear. The following morning dawned soft and clear, the air filled with the gentle hum of life returning to the shores of Galilee. Fishermen called out to one another in the distance, and gulls cried overhead. The disciples walked beside Jesus along the sand, their hearts light with understanding. The memory of that night upon the waves no longer stirred fear, but faith. Peter walked closest to the Master, the warmth of sunrise glinting in his eyes. He realized that faith wasn't built in moments of glory, but in quiet trust through the unknown. Jesus spoke softly, "When the sea rises again, remember the calm that came from me." And Peter nodded, knowing the storms would come, but so would the Savior. They stopped near a rocky outcrop where wildflowers grew among the stones. Jesus sat upon a smooth rock, the morning light soft upon his face. The disciples gathered around him once more, eager and still. "Faith," he said, "is the courage to step even when you cannot see where the path leads. It is trusting that I walk before you." Peter's heart swelled at the memory of the sea, how he had stepped out and stood, if only for a moment, upon the deep. Jesus smiled knowingly, as if reading his thoughts. "You walked, Peter, because you believed. And though you sank, my hand was there. Never forget, I am always near." Tears welled in Peter's eyes as the truth settled into his soul like light upon calm water. After a while, Jesus rose and led them toward the nearby village. Along the way, he pointed to the distant hills and said, "When storms rise within your hearts, look to the mountains, for even they bow before their Creator." The disciples walked quietly, each reflecting on how faith had reshaped them. Peter touched the hem of his damp robe and smiled faintly, the memory of the water no longer one of fear, but of love's rescue. The journey was peaceful now, each step steady with newfound confidence. The one who had walked on waves now walked beside them upon solid ground, yet the same miracle lived in their hearts. As they neared the village, the sound of laughter and life greeted them. Children playing, women drawing water, men hauling nets to shore. Jesus smiled, his eyes shining with love for every soul. The disciples watched how he moved among the people, gentle yet full of authority, and they realized that faith wasn't meant to stay hidden in moments of miracles. It was meant to be lived out in love every day. Peter felt a stirring in his chest, a resolve forming deep and unshakable. He would never forget that saving hand, nor the peace that followed the storm. From that day, every word, every step, every prayer would echo that same truth. He is near. That night, as stars blossomed above once more, the disciples gathered on a hillside overlooking the sea. The memory of that miraculous night remained vivid, The storm, the fear, the voice that calmed the deep. Peter looked at Jesus, seated among them, and whispered to himself, "Even when I fall, you are there." Jesus turned as though he'd heard and smiled. "And I always will be." The waves below shimmered in silver starlight, their rhythm slow and eternal. The disciples sat in quiet reverence, faith steady and unbroken. The sea that once frightened them now felt like a reflection of their hearts, deep, vast, and forever held in his peace. The following dawn painted the Sea of Galilee in hues of gold and lavender. A mist hovered above the water, soft as breath, as the disciples prepared their boat once more. The world seemed quiet, yet alive with memory. Peter ran his hand along the worn wooden edge of the vessel and felt again the trembling of that stormy night, the fear, the cry, the saving grasp. Jesus stood beside him, gazing over the rippling surface. "The sea remembers," he said gently, "but so does your faith." Peter smiled faintly, the warmth of those words resting deep within him. For the first time, he did not fear the waves. He saw in them a reflection of God's steadfast love, moving, vast and unending. As the sun climbed higher, the disciples pushed the boat back into the water. The sea lapped gently at their feet, cool and forgiving. Jesus climbed aboard first, his robe catching the wind like a sail, and they followed, steady and confident. The waves that once terrified them now seemed to bow beneath his presence. Peter took up an oar and smiled at John, who laughed softly, the sound like the breaking of dawn itself. The journey was peaceful, filled with quiet conversation, and the creak of wood against water. They rowed not in fear, but in faith, knowing that every storm from here on would meet the same peace that dwelt within their hearts. Midway across the lake, the wind began to stir again, gentle, playful, like a whisper of remembrance. The disciples exchanged glances, but no fear stirred among them. Instead, Peter looked toward Jesus, whose eyes were fixed upon the horizon, calm and certain. "Do you hear it?" Peter asked softly. Jesus nodded. "The wind remembers too." They all smiled, hearts at ease. The water shimmered beneath them like living glass, and the boat glided forward, without resistance, for faith had taken root. Not the fragile faith that trembles in storms, but the kind that rests in the one who commands both wind and wave with a word. When they reached the far shore, Jesus stepped onto the sand, turning to look back at the glimmering sea. "The storms will return," he said, "but so will my peace. Do not forget what you have seen." His voice carried softly over the lapping waves, each word a promise etched upon their hearts. Peter looked back across the water, seeing not a battlefield of wind and wave, but a pathway of faith. He understood now. The miracle was not in walking on the water, but in learning to walk through life's storms without losing sight of the Savior. As the day drew to its end, the disciples sat upon the shore once more. Watching the sun in blazing hues of red and gold. The sea stretched before them, endless and alive, a symbol of every trial yet. But now they were unafraid. Peter turned to Jesus and whispered, "Even when the storm returns, my heart will stay still." Jesus smiled, the light of sunset reflecting in his eyes. "Then your faith has found its calm," he said. The waves rolled softly upon the sand as the last light of day faded into peace. And from that moment on, every time the wind stirred the waters, the disciples no longer heard fear. They heard the whisper of faith that never failed.